Good evening. It's about time for our services to begin. I'd like to welcome everyone to Wednesday night Bible study and those joining us online. Any of our visitors that are with us, we invite you to come back and be with us whenever you can. Also, just run through some quick announcements, update that I have regarding the sick. Arlene and Gaylord Gray are dealing with COVID and other health issues. Steve Thigpen, Matt's dad, is at home recovering from surgery. Also been asked to announce that Elvis Roberts is having kidney removal surgery tomorrow, and the family's requested prayers for Elvis. So please keep Elvis and Emily and their family in our prayers. Also mentioned it, is Dale having surgery? Dale Riker will be having in the morning. So that's shoulder surgery in the morning. Let's remember Dale. If there any others we need to mention? Granddaughter's having surgery tomorrow. 2 o'clock. Okay. Okay. All right. Other announcements, upcoming events. This Saturday, September 2nd, will be Ladies' Day at the Pine Grove congregation. Speaker is Tish Clark. Registration begins at 8:30. That's this Saturday, September 2nd. Tomorrow is Thursday's Bible class at 21st Century Global Missions, 10 a.m., studying the book of James, James 2. And the Fulton Bible Institute fall semester will begin next Tuesday, September the 5th, in the annex at 7 p.m. And we'll be studying Bible Land Passages, Volume 1 and 2 for 10 weeks, and invite everyone to come and be with us there. Any other announcements we need to make? Those to serve tonight, Mark Wilcutt will be doing our scripture reading. Brother Don Robertson will have the invitation song following Matt's devotional, and Michael Coker will dismiss us to our classes.
Our scripture reading tonight is from Numbers chapter 32, verses 6 through 15. 6 through 15. I don't want to leave any out. Numbers 32, 6 through 15. And Moses said to the children of Gad and to the children of Reuben, shall your brethren go to war while you sit here? Now why will you discourage the heart of the children of Israel from going over into the land which the Lord has given them? Thus your fathers did when I sent them away from Kadesh Barnea to see the land. For when they went up to the valley of Eshcol and saw the land, they discouraged the heart of the children of Israel. So they did not go into the land which the Lord had given them. So the Lord's anger was aroused on that day, and he swore an oath, saying, surely none of the men who came up from Egypt from 20 years old and above shall see the land which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because they have not wholly followed me, except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, and Joshua, the son of Nun, for they have wholly followed the Lord. So the Lord's anger was aroused against Israel, and he made them wander the wilderness 40 years, until all the generation that had done evil in the sight of the Lord was gone. And look, you have arisen in your father's place a brood of sinful men, to increase still more fierce anger of the Lord against Israel. For if you turn away from following him, he will once again leave them in the wilderness, and you will destroy all these people.
If you would, mark your books, number 310. 310. That'll be our song of invitation. Tonight for devotional thought, I want to to build a thought on what Mark read for us. I know Mark had a longer reading we usually do, but I wanted to get the whole context of this verse, of this encounter. What we have here, what happens before, is that the tribes of Gad and Reuben have come to Moses and have asked to stay on the eastern side of the Jordan, the side that wasn't promised to them. And we'll talk about why they did that and what they saw. And they make this request of Moses. And what happens in verses 6 through 15 is that Moses hears this request, and Moses sort of jumps to a conclusion. Moses jumps to the conclusion that Gad and Reuben don't want to fight the fight. They jump to the conclusion that Gad and Reuben don't want to go into Canaan, that they're settling. And that's sort of where if you listen to what Mark read, that's sort of what Moses says at the beginning. When he starts, he says, "Shall your brothers go to war and you sit here? Are you not going to go fight? Are you going to make your brothers go and not fight to get that?" And he said, if you do that, you're going to discourage the people. And that leads him into comparing them. For the rest of this part was that he references verse 8 and following, where he talked about you're doing what your fathers did in Kadesh Barnea. That was the 12 spies that went into the land of Canaan, where 10 come back with a bad report. And he says, you're doing just like they did. And he said, remember the punishment they did. Remember what happened to them. And he says, how dare you think about not going to what God has done. And Moses repeats there at the end of how sinful and how bad it is of what Israel's doing, that Gad's not going into the land of Canaan, that Gad and Reuben are wanting to get out of a fight, and how dare they do that. But we find out next, and we're going to see this in our Bible classes, beginning of verse 16 and following, Gad and Reuben come to Moses and say, look, Moses, we don't want out of the fight. They say, a matter of fact, what we want to do is we want you to give us this land. Let us build some cities to protect our women and children, our wives and children, and some places for our livestock to live. And then they say, we're going to go to war with you. And we're not even just going to go to war. They say we're going to be the ones who lead the war. They say they want to go be the ones on the front line fighting. And what happens is Moses hears their plea, and Moses has to backtrack. Moses says that sounds acceptable. That sounds good, as long as you promise that you're going to go to war with Israel, that you're going to follow through on God's promise. Now, what can we learn from this? You know, when I read this today and I was getting ready for tonight and really thinking about this, I came up to this encounter with Moses, why I wanted Mark to read for it, and wondered, how many times do we do that? How many times do we see somebody and we jump to a conclusion? We judge them before we really know the whole story. You know, I'll never forget, I watched one time as a teenager, one of those groups that put on the skits where they come in after services or at a youth rally and they do a little skit, and they had this one skit where there was a group of people sitting in an auditorium, and one of the ones that was sitting there was talking about he had died and he was standing before God, and he stood before God and he was talking about his church, and he saw this and he said, well, some of the examples he gave, he said, God, let me get this right. He was standing there at the judgment day. It was after the world had ended, and they were laying people into heaven. And he saw people from his church going into heaven, and he wasn't allowed in. And he was arguing with God. And he points to one lady. He says, God, why are you letting her in? He said, I sat beside her. She never sang a word. She never did anything in church. She never spoke to anybody. And she goes in, and God says, you didn't know her. He said she had this medical issue from birth where she couldn't speak. So although she didn't speak, this is what she did do. And there was another one of, oh, well, God, he wasn't there for the last few months of his life. And how dare, I was there every time, but yet I'm not getting in, but he is. And God said, well, in the last few months of his life, he was in critical care. He was in a hospital. But you didn't go see him. You didn't visit him. And it goes through 3 or 4 ideas like this, where it was this guy jumping to conclusions based on what he saw rather than knowing the whole story. And you know, sometimes we do that same thing, don't we? We look at other people and we want to jump to a conclusion. We want to say, oh, well, we look at them and say, well, they're not as good as us, or they're not as faithful as us because of this, and this. We can't do that. We can't do that. We don't know the whole story. We have to worry about our story. Now, again, I'm not saying if somebody's in sin that we can't point it out. What I'm talking about is we can't judge each other just by looks. facts. That's the unchristian thing. And that's what Moses does here. Moses jumped to a conclusion because Gad and Reuben made a request that Moses didn't make himself, that Moses didn't ask them to make. And so Moses shoots them down at first. But then when he knows the whole story, Moses has to backtrack. And I say that again to bring this to us. It's hard to bring this all the way home. But I want us to stop and think. When we see other people, we see their actions, we see what they do, what do? Do we jump to conclusions? Do we form an opinion in our mind when we see somebody walk into our church? What do we think about? Do we jump to a conclusion about them? When we see somebody who's maybe not doing all the things we do we jump to conclusions about them? Do we want to write them off? That's not the Christian behavior. The Christian behavior is to love everyone. Yes, if we see someone that maybe not being as faithful as we are, we should encourage them, not write them off. We should call out to them, seek to bring them back. Remember we talked about that this past Sunday morning with discipline. The idea of discipline was if we see our brother or sister in fault, we try to bring them back. We try to encourage them. We don't jump to conclusions about them. We don't shut them out then the first thing we see or hear. You see, as Christians, we have to watch this attitude Moses had. We have to make sure that we don't just jump to conclusions about other people, that we don't automatically write them off when they don't do something exactly like we want them to. Number one, we're not allowing them time to change. And number two, we may be judging a little too harshly. Tonight, I want to ask you, in your life, when you see someone, what do? Again, I told you, we see somebody brand new walk in the back doors of the church building. What do? Do we immediately form a conclusion about them? Do we immediately process them? We look at their clothes, their appearance, how clean they are, how they talk. We automatically decide whether or not they belong with the church or not. We will decide whether or not they're a faithful Christian based on those few appearances. Or do we get to know them? You see, the Christian attitude is that we don't jump to conclusions, but we learn about each other. We find out the whole story, and we love each other, and we care for each other. Tonight, I want to ask you, what attitude have you had? Have you had this attitude of Moses of jumping to conclusions before it's too soon? Jumping to a conclusion before you should have? Or do we seek to find the whole story before we jump to our conclusions? Before we figure out what we're going to do? Tonight, if your attitude is not that attitude of wanting to find the whole truth and wanting to help as many people as we possibly can, we encourage you to change your life, to change that attitude. And that starts by repenting, turning away from that hard-hearted attitude and coming back to God. Part of that may be you've never become to God in the first place. If you've never done that, we encourage you to do that by becoming a child of His, having your sins washed away. Then after you're washed, you're clean, you're called to walk in a new life, a life in which we don't judge each other, we don't jump to conclusions, but that we seek to strengthen, encourage, build each other up. Tonight, if you're not living a life that has that mindset of encouraging those around you, I encourage you to change it, to make your life right. And tonight, if there's anything that you need, we encourage you to come as we stand and sing.
Oh, what wondrous love I see, freely shown for you and me. I, the one who did atone, just to show His matchless grace, Jesus suffered for the race. In Gethsemane alone, oh, what love, matchless love, oh, what love for me was shown, is forever I will be, for the love He gave to me, when He suffered all alone. Long in anguish deep was He, weeping there for you and me. For our sin to Him was known, we should love Him evermore, for the anguish that He bore. In Gethsemane matchless love. Oh, what love for me was shown, His forever I will be, for the love He gave to me when He suffered all alone.
Let us pray. Dear gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day you have given us. Thank you for the church family that meets here. Thank you for all your many blessings. Dear Lord, please be with those that are affected by the hurricane. Please help them through their time. Please, Lord, be with the ones that are helping them. And please be with us throughout the night. Please be with us and our teachers. And please help us to gain knowledge of your word. In Christ's name, amen.
While we're dismissing, don't forget the college age will stay in here tonight. Brother Chris is not here, so you'll stay in here for this class. All right. If you would, get your Bible and turn with us to Numbers 32. Numbers 32 is where we begin. We are nearing the end of this book. As Brother Mark read for us, we saw what the second part happens in the story. Just to catch you back up, it's been a few weeks. Remember that Israel has just defeated Moab, the Moabites, and the Gileads, and all those on the eastern side of the Jordan. They defeated King Og, King Sihon. They have marched up that eastern side of the Jordan, and they have conquered those people, and they're getting ready to go across the river. And remember, it's across the river is where the Promised Land is. The Promised Land is just promised from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. Well, as they are across that river, remember they're camped out on the plains of Moab, where they can look across the river and they can see Jericho. They can see the city where they're headed to. It's with this viewpoint in mind we pick up in chapter 32. Notice verse 32, beginning verse 1. Now the people of Reuben and the people of Gad had very great number of livestock. And they saw the land of Jazer and the land of Gilead, and beheld the place that was a place for livestock. So the people of Gad and the people of Reuben came and said to Moses and Eleazar the priest, and to the chiefs of the congregations, Adaroth, Dibon, Jazer, Nimrah, Heshbon, Eliah, Sabam, Nebo, and Beam. The land that the Lord struck down before the congregation of Israel is a land of livestock, and your servants have livestock. And they said, if we have found favor in your sight, let this land be given to your servants for a possession. Do not take us across the Jordan. So notice this, go back to verse 1, notice what happens. Gad and Judah and Reuben come to Moses and to the leaders, and they come with a request. They come to request, and basically what this request is that they're on the eastern side, and they say, look, the eastern side of the Jordan is a perfect place for livestock. It is a healthy land. It is a flourishing land. And here's the interesting thing about this. This is not the first time that we've heard and seen where someone has chosen the eastern side of the Jordan for a flock, is it? You remember another time when someone chose to go to the other side of the Jordan to set up their flock? Lot. When Lot and Abraham, remember Lot and Abraham come into the Promised Land? They view the land. They're looking at where they're going to be. And what do? They look over, and Lot sees the other side of the Jordan. It is lush, good for livestock, good for animals. And what does Lot say? I choose that side. And Abraham stays on this side. And God tells Abraham, the side where you stayed, that is the Promised Land. That is going to be where your children are going to be. So this is not the first time that we have seen this. This is not the first time this has occurred. And so the tribe of Gad and Reuben come, and notice they have very great livestock. They were the shepherds, the biggest shepherd tribe of the tribes of Levi, or of Judah, Israel. Get right in a minute. And so they come and they see the livestock, and they come to Moses, and notice that what they do. And here's the thing about this. You know, I told you what Moses' reaction is. Gad and Reuben are not in any way doing this underhandedly. They're not trying to get out of war. They're not trying to get out of what the promised land is. They come to Moses, the leader. They come to Eleazar, the high priest. And they come to all the other leaders. The other 10 tribes are here. And they say, listen, we know the promised land is across Jordan. We know that land is given to us. We want to stay here. This land is flourishing. God has already done what he said he's going to do in the Jordan, in Canaan. That was what? He was going to drive their enemies before them. He wasn't going to fight the ones on the eastern side, so they fought back. And now the eastern side is abandoned. Remember, we talked about that a few weeks ago. They annihilated all the Moabites. They've eliminated all the threats on the other side of the Jordan. And they say this land is just as good as what's across the Jordan. We want this side. And you notice they go on in verse 3 to list cities. And they say, here are the cities that are left. These cities are here. And notice he says, this is the land the Lord has struck down. And he said, this is a land, again, notice the emphasis, this is a land for livestock. This is a flourishing land that we want to be at. And notice they say that it's sort of interesting that verse 4, this is a land for livestock, and we have livestock. We have cattle, giving the idea that they had more cattle and more livestock, more sheep than the other tribes did. And they say, this is the better land. We want to stay here. And then you notice verse 5, and again, this shows us that they are, there's a few things here that show us that they're not in contention here. One is, notice the end of verse 4, when it talks about we have cattle, they don't say we have cattle. What do they say? Your servants have cattle. If they were trying to rebel against Moses, they would have said, we're your servants. They say, your servants have cattle. And we want to stay here. Then notice verse 5. They ask, if we have found favor in your sight, let the land be given again to your servants for a possession. Do not take us across the Jordan. Now, I think where the whole issue gets confused here with Moses is that last phrase, where they say, don't take us across the Jordan, because it sounds like at that point that Gad and Reuben say, we don't want to go to Canaan. We want to stay here. Don't make us go across. And so this leads into verse 6 and following, where Mark read for us, where Moses gets up, and when Moses hears this, Moses calls them out. Notice verse 6. Moses then said to the people of Gad and the people of Reuben, shall your brothers go to war while you sit here? He says, what fair is that? What? How is this going to work that you're going to sit over here in this land we've already conquered and make your brothers go across the river, and you're not going to do anything? And he goes on, and he says, if you do that, you're going to discourage the other people. You're going to discourage the rest of the tribes, that they're not going to want to go with war. And notice, he says, they're not going to go over to the land the Lord has given them. And then verse 8, that was number 1. He says, you're going to discourage the rest of the tribe. Number 2, he says, you're sinning just like the 10 spies did. Again, this is Moses misunderstanding what Reuben and Gad are offering. Because notice, Moses says in verse 8, you're doing what your fathers did when I sent them out, or when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to see the land. That's the 12 spies that went into Canaan. You remember what happened to them? The 10 spies came back and said, we can't take it. 2 spies say we can. Everybody listen to the 10 spies. Moses says you're committing the same kind of mutiny. You're committing the same kind of rebellion. And notice what he goes on to say. He says those 10 spies, when they came back, they discouraged the heart of the people of Israel from going into the land the Lord had given them. Verse 10, the Lord's anger was kindled against them. Notice 2 or 3 times here Moses is going to say the Lord's anger was kindled because of their rebellion. And he's saying God's anger is going to be kindled against you if you do the same thing. Verse 11, he says, surely none of the men who came up out of Egypt from 20 years old and upward shall see the land. Talking about God's anger. He gives that prophecy again, or that foretelling that anybody above 20 was going to die except Caleb and Joshua. He said, remember what God did there. Then verse 13, again, the Lord's anger was kindled against Israel. And he made them wander in the wilderness 40 years until that generation had died and had done evil in the sight of the Lord. Verse 14, and behold, you have risen in your father's place, a brood of sinful men, to increase still more the fierce anger of God, the Lord against Israel. He says, don't you realize what you're doing? You're following your father's footsteps. You're doing exactly like they did. You're sinful. The land over here, the land on this side of the Jordan, is not the promised land. It's not what God has told us. It's not where God has blessed us. And he knows verse 15, and if you turn away from following him, he will again abandon them in the wilderness, and you will destroy all this people. He says, if you do this, God's going to send us back into the wilderness. Here's Moses' thing. Moses' idea is we can see Jericho. We can see the land. Don't sin. Don't fall short now. Don't give up. And Moses has a right point, again, seeing how Israel has been in the past. He makes probably the right assumption here. It's an assumption that we could expect him to make based on how Israel's been before. But Gad and Reuben are stand-up tribes. Because notice verse 16. Moses just tears them down in his speech and says, you're sinful men, how dare you think of this? Verse 16, then they came near to him. Now that phrase, they came near to him, is a term used of a judge. That when you go before a judge and you want to hear your case, plead your case, this is a term that was used in Hebrew. They came near to him. They came to Moses by himself on the side. The leaders of Gad and Reuben, they meet with Moses. And they come to Moses and say, Moses, you misunderstood us. Moses, let us explain something. And then you notice beginning there in the end of verse 16 and following. They say, we will build sheepfolds here for our livestock and cities for our little ones. But we will take up arms, ready to go before the people of Israel until we have brought them to their place. And our little ones shall live in the fortified cities because of the inhabitants of the land. We will not return to our homes until each of the people of Israel has gained his inheritance. For we will not inherit with them on the other side of the Jordan and beyond, because our inheritance has come to us on this side of the Jordan to the east. Notice what they tell Moses. They say, no, Moses, listen. Let us build sheepfolds. Sheepfolds were pens for their sheep. All this was a stone wall about 3 foot tall that would make a big circle and have a gate in the middle. Have a gate for their sheep to go in and out. They went in the sheepfold at night, they come out during the day. They were going to leave the sheep and their goats and their cattle to the women and children to care for. They just had to build them a place. Then they say, let us go to these cities. Now the cities they've just defeated, they've already killed all the people. They said, let's go back and let us repair those cities. So our people, our wives and children, have a walled city to protect them. And they say, let us go build walled cities, repair the walled cities, let us build sheepfolds. And then notice verse 17. And notice what the end of verse 16 is, let's build it for our little ones. In verse 17, but we will take up arms, ready to go before the people of Israel until we have brought them to their place. And our little ones shall live in the fortified cities because of the inhabitants of the land. Notice what Gad and Reuben say. They said, Moses, here's what we'll do. Let us build the cities. Let us build sheepfolds. And we'll go to war with you. And we won't just go to war. We'll be the front line. That's the idea, that we will go before you. The other idea, some have said that what Reuben and Gad suggest here is that they're going to be the front line. Because they're going to be the ones who are able to hit first. Because guess what? If their women or children are across the river, their wives and children are across the river, when they're getting ready to go to war, when the other tribes have to worry about getting their families situated and then going to war, Gad and Reuben can go straight into war. When someone comes to attack, Gad and Reuben are ready to go. They don't have to worry about protecting anything. Some have even said that what Gad and Reuben have offered here is they're telling Moses, we'll be front line. And in the ancient war system, the way they fought, the front line was where you experienced the most casualties and injuries. They are risking and betting their lives that they will fight for Israel. They say, just let us get our people taken care of, and we'll be on the front line with you. And then you notice verse 18. We will not return unto our homes, until each of the people of Israel has gained his inheritance. They say, here's the thing, we're going to cross Jordan with you. We will not cross the Jordan back until Canaan is Israel's. We're going to fight, and we're going to fight with you until Israel is yours. What's interesting about this, I'll give you a little fourth tense, and I forgot the exact verses where this is. In Joshua, I believe it's Joshua 6 or 8, there's a reference that Reuben and Gad are across the Canaan fighting with Israel. And then it's not until Joshua 22 that it says when Canaan has been conquered and defeated that Gad and Reuben go home. They keep their word. And this is what they tell Moses. And they tell Moses, look, we won't take any land on the other side of the river. We want this land. You let us have this land, and we will take this land here because our land is on the east. Then you notice verse 20. Moses replies to them, if you will do this, and if you will take up arms to go before the Lord for the war, and for every armed man of you will pass over the Jordan before the Lord until he has driven out his enemies before him, and the land is subdued before the Lord, then after that you shall return and be free of obligation to the Lord and to Israel. And this land shall be your possession before the Lord. But if you will not do so, behold, you have sinned against the Lord, and be sure your sin will find you out. Build cities for your little ones and folds for your sheep, and do what you have promised. So Moses says, basically, you've got a deal. If you will do what you promised to do. But Moses makes one little interesting statement here when he tells them this. He says, make sure you keep your word. Make sure you don't backtrack. Because notice the end of verse 23. Be sure, what? Your sin will find you out. He says, don't think that God won't know what you've done. Don't think you're going to get away scot-free. Now, there's some reasons for this warning of Moses. Because one thing we've got to realize, Moses is making this deal with these men, but what's about to happen to Moses? What's Moses about to do? Before Israel can cross over to Jordan, what does Moses got to do? He's got to die. He's got to go up on the mountain and die. So Moses is telling these people, look, you're making this deal with me. Don't think that when I die, you're out of this deal. You got to keep this deal. And we'll see that same point referenced in just a minute. But he says, don't think you're getting out of this. If you commit to this, you've got to follow it all the way through. And then you notice that Reuben and Gad, verse 25, they do what Moses says. Notice verse 25, and the people of Gad and the people of Reuben said to Moses, your servants will do as my Lord commands. Our little ones, our wives, our livestock, and all of our cattle shall remain there in the seas of Gilead. But your servants will pass over, every man who is armed for war before the Lord, to battle as my Lord orders. Again, Gad and Reuben stand up, and they show that they're not doing this out of rebellion. Because notice what they call Moses 2 or 3 times. They call him my Lord. That's not capital Lord. It's not God. This is my Lord Moses. You're the leader, Moses. You're the one over us. We promise you we will do this. We only want to keep our wives and children safe. Now I thought about that this morning as I was reading this, and this afternoon I kept coming back to one thought. Do you realize what Gad and Reuben are doing here? There's a big thing Gad and Reuben are doing here with their wives and children. The text doesn't tell us this, but I think it's implied. Gad and Reuben are trusting God to protect their wives and children. Because where are all the fighting men going? They're going across the Jordan. They're not leaving a single man behind to defend them. You know, you would think from an earthly point of view, Gad and Reuben say, look, let's leave 50 or 100 men in each city, and the rest will go for you. No, they say every man will march across Jordan. Every man over 20 will march to war, leaving their women and children. I keep saying women, but I mean wives. Their wives and their children exposed. Why do they do that? Because they trusted in God. Mm-hmm.
I think they had room to assess it. They trusted God. They didn't choose a land like Lot for selfish motives. They knew what their motives were. They knew that if God, they served God on the other side of the road, He's still God on this side. And
Oh, yeah.
if they were not happy, God would speak to Moses and say, no,
Oh, yeah.
that's not what I want.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, I think so. I think so, too. Joe? All right, let me get Joe. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he was. I think he's realizing that this, again, the sense that God's giving his approval here. What was you going to say, Joe? Yes. Oh, yeah. That's true, too. So, again, it's very, very interesting how just the thought Reuben and Gad had here. Again, like we were saying, it wasn't selfish motives. It wasn't just selfish. They were willing to fight for there, and they trusted God. And like Joe said, they didn't even think about the long term. That they were They were the first ones to fall when the outsiders came in. So this is what Reuben and Gad proposed to Moses. Any other comments before we move on? All right, let's see what happens. The rest of what happens. Verse 25. And the people of Gad and the people, I already read that. Sorry, I backed up for catch a verse. 28. This is what I said was a reference. Remember I told you they tell Moses, and Moses says, hey, you've got to do this even if I'm here or not. Verse 28 picks up that story there. Verse 28. So Moses gave command concerning them to Eleazar the priest and to Joshua the son of Nun and the heads of the fathers' houses of the tribes of the people of Israel. And Moses said to them, if the people of Gad and of the people of Reuben, every man who is armed for battle before the Lord will pass with you over the Jordan, and the land shall be subdued before you, then you shall give the land of Gilead for a possession. However, they will not pass over with you armed, and they shall have possession among you in the land of Canaan. So notice what Moses says. Moses says, here's the line. If they go with you and win, then they can come back to this side. If they don't go with you, their possession is not the eastern side. They've got to have a part of the western side too. God is saying he's going to take this land away from them. And so we pick up there, verse 31. And the people of Gad and the people of Reuben answered, what the Lord has said to your servants, we will do. We will pass over armed before the Lord into the land of Canaan, and the possession of our inheritance shall remain with us beyond the Jordan. So they make this deal with Moses in private. Moses comes before all the leaders. Notice Eleazar, Joshua, and the tribe leaders are there. They're making this official. This is what we've decided. This is the agreement we've got. And they all agree. They all agree to this deal. Then we pick back up verse 33. And Moses gave to them, to the people of Gad, to the people of Reuben, and to the half-tribe Manasseh, the son of Joseph, the kingdom of Sihon, the king of the Amorites, and the kingdom of Og, king of Bashan, the land and its cities with their territories, the cities of the land throughout the country. Now, let's stop here before we finish this, because verse 33 introduces another aspect to this that's not been mentioned. You notice something new that's added here? Gad, Reuben, and Manasseh. Why Manasseh is included, we really don't know. Perhaps some think that they went to war and they had fought the northern part, that they were the ones who led the charge, and because they won that part, God gave it to them. We really don't know. But what we do find out is that Manasseh breaks in half. That half of Manasseh is on the eastern side of the Jordan, and the other half, it is sort of half, but they go over the Sea of Galilee and they go all the way into Canaan. The Manasseh is going to have a huge land, and they have land on both sides of the Jordan eventually. And so Moses says part of Manasseh is going to stay here, and they're going to live in this land. You go back to verse 34, and we begin to look at the names of the seas. Now, again, you go back to verse 3, and you see that list of names. There are about 8 or 9 names listed as cities. When you get down to where we're at in verse 34, we're going to see the Gad and Reuben take those cities and some of those cities, some of the cities listed in verse 34 and following are the same cities listed earlier. They said, these are cities we've seen that are good cities. We want them. And now we find out what these cities are like. Notice verse 34. And the people of Gad built Dibon and Atharoth and Oriar and Atharoth Shophon, Jazer, Jogbahan, Beth Nimrah, and Beth Haran, fortified cities and folds for the sheep. The people of Reuben built Heshbon, Eliah, Kirathim, Nebo, and Baal Meon. Their names were changed, and Sibmah, and they gave other names to the cities that they built. Now let's stop here. Notice Reuben conquers some places. Verse 38, Reuben conquers two cities, one named Nebo and one named Baal Meon. Nebo is a name of one of their false gods. Baal is the name of one of their false gods. So this again shows Reuben's trust that the other cities, they sort of kept some of the names. These cities, because they were named after the pagan gods, they changed them immediately. They changed these cities because these cities, these names were dedicated to these gods. This Baal Meon is going to be a city dedicated to Baal, the god Baal. This is his city, or one of his cities. The city of Nebo was a city dedicated to Nebo. And they say, no, we're not going to do that. We're taking those names away. We're removing those names because we don't want any connection with that. Then you notice from there we get to verse 39. This is going to find out about Manasseh. Now, when we find out about Manasseh, Manasseh is going to break up into different groups. Notice, and the sons of Machir, the son of Manasseh, went to Gilead and conquered it, and dispossessed the Amorites who were in it. And Moses gave Gilead to Machir, the son of Manasseh, and he settled in it. And Jair, the son of Manasseh, went and captured their villages and called them Havoth Jair. And Nobah went and captured Kenath and its villages and called it Nobah, after his own name. So here we have, again, this is why this is called the half-tribe of Manasseh, because we only have these three families on the eastern side of the Jordan. But here we get the story of why Israel is on both sides of the Jordan. The promise to Moses was from the Jordan River, or promise to Abraham was Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, and then north and south. That was a promise. They've extended that promise even further. And they've extended it, as we said, because of their trust and faith in God. And they get this land only on the promise. They're going to go into the land. Like I told you, Joshua will tell us that when they go in to fight the people, Gad and Reuben went with them. And Gad and Reuben stayed there until all of Canaan was defeated. And after Canaan is defeated, then Gad and Reuben return back to their homes. Again, I forget exactly how many, I think it's years it takes them to conquer Canaan. And I forget the exact number, but that's the trust they had. They left their wives and their children across the river while they went and fought the war. And it shows their trust and their faith in God, that God would deliver the land to them, but God would also protect their families. And so that's what we see from Numbers 32. Any question or comment about Numbers 32? Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I think so. And I'm wondering how much that may have been inspired by seeing the promise. And I say that because, again, seeing the promise God gave Joshua and Caleb, that he was going to deliver those 2 men and nobody else out of the 2 million total Israelites. And now they've watched everybody over the age of 40 die except Joshua and Caleb. You got to think about it. Imagine being in a place where the oldest person is 60, because they had to be 20 or below, and they wandered for 40 years, was 60, and you got 2 men who are in their 80s. Those 2 men are going to stand out. Those 2 men are going to be, hey, there's something different about them. And the story is going to be, hey, they were good spies, and God blessed them. And I think that was a motivation for Gad and Reuben to say, hey, God bless them too. He can bless our tribes. He'll give us what he promised. Yeah, those who were faithful. That's true. All right, we're going to stop right there. Next week we'll pick up in 33. We'll look at these next few chapters. I think are going to be fairly quick. Appreciate everyone's attention. Appreciate everyone being here. Like I say, we're going to stop right there tonight. Real quick, starting next Tuesday night, we're starting back our FBI. We're going to try a different set of videos this time. I've been wanting to try these, and we're going to do these. You've noticed the title is Bible Land Passages. What it is it's going to be about a 25, 30-minute video every week where it's going to be an archaeology exploration. They're going to go back and show us the ruins. They take time to walk through every city, and there's a bunch of episodes. The first episode is about Jerusalem. I say that to say that this is a different kind of video than what we've watched before with FBI, and I think it'll be very informative. I know I've watched the videos. You'll enjoy them. They're documentary style where they show you the history and go and actually they'll take these stories, and here's why the key. They'll take these stories and they'll say, when the Bible talks about this, this is what they saw. And they'll show you the video, the picture of what it looks like today. And say, this is what the land was, like this, like what we're talking about now, the plains of Moab. There's one where they talk about Jericho. They'll show you from the plains of Moab. They'll set up the camera and they'll show you across the river and say, here's what they saw. Here's what they saw when they were sitting here. And I think you'll get a great appreciation for that, but the beauty of that, and a more appreciation of these stories to see the archaeology and see the ruins of what these cities look like. So I just want to encourage you, if you can, to come out and join us. Like I say, there's 10 videos of that. And we encourage you to come out and give us a try with that so we can have a good class. But again, thank you for your attention. Like I said, we're going to stop right there, and you'll be dismissed. Thank you.